His heart almost stopped when that tiny detail appeared on the child's arm. The air grew heavy, the past screamed, and an impossible truth threatened to destroy secrets buried for years. Nothing would ever be the same after that moment. Subscribe to the channel and find out what happened. The golden light of late afternoon streamed into Stirling Manor, painting the imposing halls with a brilliance that, for most mortals, would be the epitome of luxury and achievement. But for Alexander Stirling, at 40 years old and owner of a financial empire spanning tech ventures in Silicon Valley, luxury real estate in Miami, and vast agricultural interests across the Midwest headquartered in a high-rise on Wall Street, that splendor was merely a silent reminder of the profound solitude that filled every corner of his existence. The manor, with its polished marble, crystal chandeliers, and priceless artworks sourced from exclusive European galleries, seemed more like a private museum, a mausoleum of dreams than a home. His footsteps echoed in the grand corridors, a sound that, instead of filling the emptiness, only amplified it, transforming him into a ghost in his own house, a spectre moving between luxury and melancholy. Alexander was a titan in the business world, a true power player on the American economic scene. His decisions were swift, precise, capable of moving mountains of money and influencing entire markets, from Wall Street trading floors to sprawling luxury developments in coastal California. Early in the morning, in his office with a panoramic view of New York City that never sleeps, he was the architect of his destiny and the master of an army of dedicated employees. But when the sun set and the city lights began to twinkle outside, igniting the nightlife and the metropolis's vibrant pulse, the ruthless entrepreneur gave way to a melancholic man, ensnared in the webs of a past he couldn't untangle. It was as if, upon closing his office door, he left behind not only work, but also the persona of success, revealing the wound he carried. The memory of a youthful love, one of those overwhelming loves that arrive unannounced and depart without explanation, was an open wound in his chest, a constant pang that no board meeting, millionaire contract closing, or trip to exotic destinations like Maui or the Swiss Alps could heal. He had tried everything to forget, to fill the void she left. Beautiful and intelligent women, glamorous parties that lasted until dawn, luxury sports cars, art collections that would make any curator envious. Nothing worked. Her image, blurred by time but still vivid in his mind, was the constant shadow that accompanied him, a cruel reminder of what he had lost. Her name, a closely guarded secret in his heart, was a silent lament that only he could hear, a sad song playing repeatedly in his soul. 5 long years had passed since he last saw her, or perhaps it was longer. The counting of years merged with the pain, blurring the timeline. She simply vanished, like smoke carried away by an evening breeze, leaving behind only a profound longing, that bittersweet yearning for something or someone no longer present, a melancholy both sweet and bitter. For Alexander, this longing was a daily burden, an anchor preventing him from truly moving forward, from allowing himself to love again, or to find the peace he so desired. He was a successful man, yes, a true kingpin in his field, but a success that sounded hollow, without the melody of a happy heart, without the warmth of genuine affection to share. The nights were the worst. While the world outside slept or enjoyed themselves in bustling clubs and bars, Alexander lost himself in thoughts, reliving conversations, touches, laughs that seemed to come from another life. He wondered what had happened, where she might be now, if she too remembered him with the same intensity, with the same pang of pain. It was a self-imposed torture, but he couldn't avoid it. It was the only connection he still had to the purest and most innocent part of himself, the one who once believed in unconditional love, before the cynicism of the business world and the pain of loss transformed him into the cold, reserved, and almost inaccessible man he was today. He felt like a character in a prime-time drama, trapped in an endless play but without the hope of a predictable happy ending. His days were a choreographed routine of appointments, breakfast with important shareholders, teleconferences with offices across the country and overseas, business lunches at Michelin-starred restaurants, formal dinners with influential politicians and international investors. But, Upon returning to Stirling Manor, the silence was overwhelming, an emptiness that reverberated through the walls and expensive furniture. There were no children's laughs, no comforting family chatter, just the sound of the espresso machine preparing his solitary drink and the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards, as if the house itself sighed with him, sharing his melancholy. The Olympic-sized swimming pool in the garden, the tennis courts, the private gym with the most modern equipment, all of it was superfluous, luxury items that couldn't fill the hole in his chest. He would give all of it, every penny of his fortune, every dollar he had accumulated, for a single moment of true happiness, for a glimpse of that person who once illuminated his world with the intensity of a beach sunset and then faded without a trace. Alexander's solitude was so palpable it almost took physical form, a constant presence by his side, like an invisible butler serving him daily doses of melancholy and silent despair. He tried to drown the pain in work, in the figures and graphs that filled the screens of his state-of-the-art computers, but it was like trying to extinguish a fire with gasoline. The more he dedicated himself to the empire he built with sweat and intellect, the more he realized something fundamental was missing, something money couldn't buy, not even the dollar, with all its market strength and ability to open doors. It was a cruel limitation, a constant reminder that there are things in life beyond the reach of any bank account, no matter how full. But amidst the sumptuous solitude that filled Stirling Manor, a silent and almost ethereal presence moved with the precision of a clock, weaving an invisible routine that sustained the order of that particular universe. It was Sophia Clark, the cleaner who for the past 2 years had become such an intrinsic part of the landscape that many perceived her more as a functional element than as a person. She arrived punctually, even before the first golden rays of sun gilded the manor's windows, and dedicated herself to her work with an efficiency that bordered on perfection. Her steps were light, almost inaudible on the Persian rugs and polished marble floors, a striking contrast to the heavy sound of Alexander Stirling's own footsteps when he deigned to circulate through the house. Sophia had the ability to disappear, to become a discreet blur, a spectre who organized, cleaned and polished, without ever disturbing the peace or the melancholy that inhabited those vast rooms. She was the silent gear that made the machine of opulence function, an essential but almost always forgotten piece. Her life was a universe apart, a distant galaxy from the opulence in which Alexander Stirling was immersed. While he dealt with millions in figures, global deals, and the weight of an incessant search, Sophia battled daily with the harsh reality of supporting a small daughter alone. Every dollar earned at Stirling Manor was counted, planned, stretched to cover basic expenses. The tight rent of her modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood in Stamford, Connecticut, Clara's food, and, of course, the diapers and milk that seemed to disappear at an alarming rate. She had to make ends meet with the little she earned, always figuring things out so that her little one lacked nothing. The dignity of her work was undeniable, and Sophia carried it with silent pride, even if exhaustion was a constant companion. It was a job that required not only physical strength, but mental resilience to keep her personal life strictly separate from her professional one, especially when the professional life happened in the home of a man who, unknowingly, was linked to her most painful past. The contrast between her daily toil and the lavish luxury around her was a constant reminder of the silent injustice that so many people like her faced in America. Sophia's gaze was a mirror of her reserved soul. There was a depth there, a veiled sadness that few, if any, would ever dare to probe. Behind the facade of a hard-working and discreet woman, there was a complex story, a secret she guarded closely, fearing each day that the veil of normality might be torn, revealing the truth that consumed her. With every corner she cleaned, every surface she polished, Sophia felt the weight of her own existence in contrast to Alexander's. He, the magnate, the owner of an empire; she, the cleaner, the single mother, the survivor. The irony of the situation, of being so close and yet so distant from the man who was once everything to her, was a heavy burden she carried in silence. Often, passing one of the Venetian mirrors in the manor, she saw her own reflection, a woman in her 30s, her skin marked by the sun and fatigue, but with a glimmer of determination in her eyes, a glimmer that Alexander, immersed in his own pain, would never notice. Clara, her little Clara, was the sun of her life, the reason for all her effort, all her sacrifice, and for that, protecting the girl was her absolute priority. Sophia did everything to keep Clara away from Alexander's curious or even indifferent eyes. When she brought her daughter to work, on days when she couldn't find anyone to care for her, Clara was restricted to a specific area of the house, usually the service area, where she could play with some old toys Sophia kept, or was taken to the small park nearby, where Sophia could supervise her while taking a lunch break, a simple sandwich and a juice box. The idea that Alexander might notice Clara, might interact with her, filled Sophia with an irrational yet deeply rooted dread. It was a fear that the child's innocence or some tiny detail, perhaps a smile, a gesture, or worse, a birthmark, might unravel the secret she had worked so hard to bury. She lived on edge, always alert, always ready to deflect any unwanted attention from her daughter. Sophia's routine was methodical, almost ritualistic, a silent ballet of brooms and cloths. She woke before dawn, prepared a simple breakfast for herself and Clara, dropped her daughter at daycare or with a trusted neighbor, and set off for Stirling Manor. There, each room had its time, each task its sequence. She started with the kitchen, then the living and dining rooms, the bathrooms, the empty bedrooms, and finally Alexander's office. It was a rhythm that helped her maintain control over her small world, a way to organize the internal chaos that accompanied her. While vacuuming the dust from the antique furniture, her thoughts flew to Clara, to the uncertain future, to the bills due at the end of the month, to the past that insisted on haunting her. She wondered if life would ever give her a truce, if the peace Alexander Stirling seemed not to value would one day be hers. All that luxury for her was just scenery, a backdrop for her own daily battle, a reality that kept her grounded in reality. The coexistence of these two worlds under the same roof was a silent dance of contrasts. Alexander in his ivory tower, absorbed in his search and his melancholy, often barely noticing the presence of the woman who cleaned his quarters. Sophia downstairs or in the corridors, weaving order and cleanliness, but carrying a universe of feelings and fears. She saw him occasionally, a fleeting glimpse of the man he had become, more mature, more serious, but still with that air of someone carrying the world on his shoulders. He, in turn, probably saw her as a useful shadow, a piece of the intricate mechanism that kept his life functioning, perhaps not even knowing her full name. There were no long conversations, just the necessary instructions, given with the formality that the situation demanded. Alexander Stirling's life, though filled with luxury and material achievements, was a constant echo of silence and routine in the vastness of Stirling Manor. His days followed a strict schedule where every minute was planned, every interaction professional, and every space in the house seemed to respect the aura of his seriousness. The corridors, long and imposing, were rarely disturbed by anything other than the soft sound of the service staff's footsteps or the whisper of the wind entering through the high windows. It was an environment that, for many, would represent the pinnacle of comfort, but for Alexander, it was often a palpable reminder of his self-imposed solitude, a fortress of marble and glass that protected him from the world, but also isolated him. On a Tuesday afternoon, which promised to be just like so many others, something unexpected broke the sepulchral calm. Alexander was immersed in financial reports in his upstairs office, his concentration so dense it could almost be felt in the air. Suddenly, a subtle sound, almost inaudible, but completely dissonant with the reigning peace, reached his ears. It wasn't the familiar sound of Sophia Clark working in some distant room, nor the creak of an old door. It was a sound more organic, a slight thump-thump, followed by a soft, childish murmur, as if a toy had fallen on the marble floor, and the child holding it had expressed slight dissatisfaction. Alexander lifted his head from the papers, frowning. What on earth was that? He had lived in that manor for years, and the presence of children was utterly alien to his daily life. His mind, always logical and analytical, immediately tried to find an explanation. Had an employee brought a relative? Unlikely, given the rigor of his rules. The sound repeated, this time clearer. A faint, muffled cry, almost a murmur, coming from the main corridor. near the staircase leading to the service area. An unusual curiosity, almost an irritation, began to bubble within him. His kingdom of silence had been violated. Driven by a mixture of strangeness and a pang of something he couldn't identify, Alexander rose from his leather chair and walked to the office door. He opened it slowly and peeked into the corridor. At first glance, everything seemed normal. The tapestries on the walls, the antique vases, the light filtering from the windows. But then his eyes fell upon a spot on the floor near one of the ornate pillars. There, a small rag doll, colorful and a little worn, lay on its side as if abandoned, and right beside it, sitting on the cold floor, was a little girl. It was Clara. Her big, expressive blue eyes were fixed on the doll. Her messy brown curls framed a small, pale face, and an adorable pout adorned her lips as she tried, without much success, to reach the toy. She wasn't crying loudly, just emitting small sounds of frustration, like a puppy who can't get what it wants. The image was so unexpected, so incongruous with the cold grandeur of the corridor, that Alexander stood there agape for an instant. He had never seen Clara up close, only glimpses from a distance, when Sophia took her to the small park nearby during hours he wasn't home. Now, there she was, a small spot of life and innocence in the heart of his sterile world. An innocent, almost imperceptible smile bloomed on the girl's lips when she finally managed to nudge the doll closer. Her eyes, which had previously expressed slight discontent, now sparkled with a small victory. She looked up, and her eyes met Alexander's. There was no fear in them, nor the shyness that many children exhibited in the presence of unknown adults. There was only pure curiosity. She tilted her head, a gesture that seemed to ask, "Who are you?" And a slight smile, disarming in its simplicity, opened on her face. In that instant, something inside Alexander stirred. It was a strange, warm, and unexpected sensation that infiltrated the cracks of his emotional armor. The coldness he had cultivated for years, the distance he kept from everything and everyone, seemed to waver before that gaze. Clara, with her pure and spontaneous presence, was a vibrant contrast to the austere environment of the manor and Alexander's rigidly controlled life. He felt an inexplicable connection, a curiosity that went far beyond the simple surprise of finding a child in his home. It wasn't just the breaking of a pattern, it was the breaking of an internal barrier, a small breach through which a child's innocence penetrated the defenses of a solitary man. He didn't know what to do. His instincts as an entrepreneur, as a ruthless negotiator, were useless here. What would he say to a child who looked at him with such frankness? He was about to approach, perhaps to return the doll, when Sophia, her face flushed and hair a little disheveled, appeared hurriedly at the end of the corridor. She seemed to have come from the kitchen, perhaps looking for her daughter. Her eyes widened when she saw Clara sitting on the floor and Alexander standing at his office door. A momentary panic crossed her face, a mixture of surprise, and Alexander noticed a certain fear. "Clara, what are you doing here?" Sophia said, her voice a hurried whisper as she bent down to pick up her daughter. She shot a quick glance at Alexander, a silent apology in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Sterling. She must have slipped away while I was cleaning the kitchen. It won't happen again." Alexander merely nodded, unable to formulate a response. The interaction was brief but impactful. As Sophia hurried away with Clara in her arms, the girl waved at Alexander with her little hand, a farewell gesture as natural as her smile. Alexander stood there watching them disappear, and the silence of the manor returned. But now it seemed different. It was no longer a pure silence, but a silence filled with the echo of a child's whimper, of a doll falling, and most importantly, of a curious gaze. The feeling of strangeness remained, but it was no longer an irritation. It was a new perspective on the life unfolding silently under his roof, a life he barely knew existed. The image of Clara, with her big eyes and disarming smile, remained etched in his mind, a seed of a new and unknown emotion, a curiosity he wouldn't be able to ignore. The image of little Clara, with her curious eyes and easy smile, persisted in floating through Alexander Sterling's mind. He tried, for days, to ignore the strange sensation the girl's presence awakened, attributing it to fatigue or the loneliness that at times assailed him in the immensity of Sterling Manor. However, Something in the child's vivacity, perhaps the way she observed the world with a disarming purity, prevented him from simply turning the page. The curiosity, once a whisper, was now an insistent call he could no longer silence. On a sunny afternoon, as Alexander descended the stairs to the living room, the scene unfolding in the garden paralyzed him. Sophia Clark, his cleaner, was crouched, organizing some gardening tools, while Clara, wearing a floral dress, ran awkwardly across the grass, chasing an imaginary butterfly. The girl's high-pitched laughter filled the air, and Alexander felt an unexpected warmth in his chest. He watched from afar, hidden in the gloom of the hall, the affectionate interaction between mother and daughter. Sophia, usually so contained and professional, showed a side of tenderness he had never witnessed. Suddenly, Clara stumbled on a protruding root and fell, letting out a small whimper. Sophia rushed to help her, picking the girl up and comforting her with affection. As she adjusted her, Clara's dress sleeve slipped, revealing the inside of her left forearm. And there it was, a small detail, a singular design that made Alexander gasp for air. It was a birthmark. Not just any spot, but a cluster of pigments forming an unmistakable design, almost like a tiny constellation. Alexander's heart raced, beating like a frantic drumbeat, like a rock concert. His eyes widened, fixed on that mark, as a wave of shock hit him with the force of a tsunami. He felt the ground disappear beneath his feet, and the world around him seemed to freeze. That mark, he knew it, knew every detail, every curve, every point. It was identical to the birthmark that adorned the same place, on the same forearm, of his lost youthful love. The woman he had searched for incessantly for so long, who had disappeared without a trace, taking with her a piece of his soul. An avalanche of memories crashed over him, vivid and painful, as if no time had passed. He saw himself back in his 20s, on a park bench, beneath the shade of a leafy tree, her hand in his, fingers intertwined. He remembered the soft touch of her skin, the scent of jasmine that accompanied her, the laughter that echoed in his ears. He recalled the first time he noticed the mark, in a moment of intimacy and complicity, and how she had explained its peculiar origin, a family story that made it even more special. He could feel the warmth of her skin beneath his lips, the secret of that sign that only the two of them shared. Incredulity, shock, and a pang of hope he had buried so deeply that he thought he would never feel it again, all mingled in a whirlwind of emotions. It was impossible. It couldn't be. The daughter of Sophia Clark, his cleaner, the woman who had worked in his house for 2 years, one he barely noticed beyond daily tasks, couldn't have such a profound connection to his past. It was too strong a coincidence to ignore, but the idea was so absurd, so outside any reality he could conceive, that his mind refused to process it. He struggled to breathe, to find some logic, some rational explanation for what his eyes had just witnessed. He relived past scenes with terrifying clarity, the hidden rendezvous, the whispers of love, the plans for a future that never arrived. The mark was not just a physical detail, it was a portal to the past, an undeniable link, a silent scream across time. How could he not have noticed before? How could Sophia, so close, so present, never have reminded him? The image of the cleaner, with her reserved posture and distant gaze, now took on mysterious, unsettling contours. Alexander's head spun. The sound of Clara's laughter and Sophia's soft voice seemed distant, muffled by the buzzing in his ears. That was not a simple birthmark. It was a signature, irrefutable proof of a connection that defied logic and time. Alexander's mind, accustomed to dealing with numbers and business strategies, was now in tatters, unable to fit the pieces of this improbable puzzle. The coincidence was a punch to the gut, a bucket of cold water over his organized and predictable life. He couldn't avert his gaze from the girl who was now playing again, oblivious to the earthquake she had just caused in the magnate's life. From that moment on, nothing would ever be the same. Alexander Sterling's life, once marked by solitude and silent searching, had just been turned upside down. Doubt transformed into an overwhelming obsession. He needed answers, needed to unravel that mystery which suddenly had become the most important thing in his existence. The truth he knew was there, hovering over Sterling Manor, and he would not rest until he unearthed it, no matter how painful or unbelievable it might be. The imminent revelation pulsed through his veins, transforming Alexander Sterling's every thought into a feverish, almost insane quest. From the moment Clara's birthmark, identical to that of his lost love, etched itself into his mind, Alexander's life ceased to be the same. The businessman, once focused exclusively on his empires and the solitary routine dictated by work, now saw his world turned upside down by a silent obsession that consumed every fiber of his being. He barely slept, and when he did, his dreams were populated by flashes of the past, young faces, distant laughter, and, invariably, the small reddish mark on a child's skin. The manor, once a refuge from his solitude, transformed into a labyrinth of memories and a stage for his secret investigation. Alexander began to rummage through the attic, a place he hadn't visited in years, in search of any trace of his past with the woman he loved. Dusty boxes, holding the remnants of a life he thought he had left behind, were opened with an almost desperate urgency. Yellowed photo albums, forgotten journals with teenage handwriting, crumpled love letters, and even small objects that seemed insignificant at the time were now invaluable treasures. Each item was handled with reverence, as if it might hold the key to unraveling the mystery that tormented him. He spent hours in his office or in the attic itself under the dim light of an old bare bulb, examining every detail. The photos were his main focus. He searched for images of her, of himself beside her, of anything that could rekindle the memory of a birthmark that, to him, now seemed to be the strongest link to the truth. He mentally compared the small mark on Clara's skin with the vivid, almost palpable images and memories of his lost love. It was like assembling a giant puzzle, where each piece found seemed to fit, but the complete picture was still blurred, shrouded in a fog of doubts and hopes. The similarity was terrifying, undeniable, but Alexander's logical mind, the same that had led him to business success, demanded concrete, irrefutable proof. His attention, once indifferent to Sophia Clark's discreet presence in the manor, now turned completely to her. The cleaner, who for 2 years had entered and exited his house with the same discretion, was now the center of his private universe. Alexander began to observe her closely, with an intensity he didn't know he possessed. Her every movement, every gesture, every word spoken in her soft accent was analyzed through a new lens. He searched for similarities, traits he had never noticed, or perhaps had ignored in his past blindness and pain. Sophia's eyes, the shape of her smile, the way she styled her hair, everything was scrutinized in search of an echo, a remnant of the woman he had lost. It was a dangerous game, a ballet of disguised glances and calculated movements, which he executed with a surgeon's precision. Alexander tried to find opportunities, almost created them, to be near Clara, not obviously so as not to raise Sophia's suspicions, but with subtle pretexts. He offered to help with a toy, or to fetch something for the girl, always with the intention of glimpsing the mark. He observed Sophia's interaction with her daughter, the affection, the protectiveness. There was something in the way Sophia looked at Clara that resonated with an old memory of Alexander, a tenderness he recognized but couldn't yet place. Each time he saw little Clara, the conviction strengthened, but also the fear of building castles in the sand. Stirling Manor, a place that once represented the pinnacle of his material achievement, now was a scene of secret investigation, a stage for an intense personal drama. Alexander moved through the rooms with a new perception, every corner seeming to hold a secret, every shadow harboring a possibility. He felt an overwhelming mix of hope and fear. The hope of reuniting with a love he thought was lost forever, of filling the emptiness that had accompanied him for so many years, of having a family. And at the same time, the agonizing fear of being wrong, of having misinterpreted the signs, or even worse, of discovering a painful truth that could crumble the little piece he had built. The search was both external and internal. Externally, he scoured the physical past, objects, photos. Internally, he relived every moment of his youth, every conversation, every touch, trying to fit the pieces, trying to understand how his life had taken that turn, and how Sophia fit into it. It was a torment that propelled him to go deeper, not to give up, to become increasingly convinced that there was an undeniable connection between Sophia, Clara, and his past. The image of Clara's birthmark was like a beacon, guiding him through a sea of uncertainties. He felt he was on the verge of a discovery that would change his life forever, for better or for worse. The intensity of his observation and the change in his behavior did not go unnoticed. Sophia, accustomed to the almost invisible discretion of her role, began to feel Alexander's eyes on her. A constant presence, a gaze that once was absent, and now became heavy and laden with a curiosity that unsettled her. She noticed the way he followed her with his eyes, the invented pretexts to get closer to Clara, the way he seemed to absorb every detail of her daily life in the manor. A silent alarm began to sound in her mind, a premonition that the secret she guarded with such zeal was at risk, about to be unveiled. Even if the alarm only rang in her mind, Sophia needed no words to grasp the abrupt shift in the atmosphere of Stirling Manor. It wasn't a physical alteration, but an invisible current of energy that seemed to envelop them both. Alexander's eyes, once distant and lost in his own millionaire businessman thoughts, now pursued her, heavy with a curiosity that profoundly unsettled her. He watched her as she cleaned, when she took Clara for a stroll in the garden, even when she prepared a simple cup of coffee in the kitchen. It was not the gaze of an employer, but of someone searching for something, piecing together a puzzle whose fragments Sophia knew were in her hands. His presence in the manor, once an almost robotic routine, devoid of major interactions beyond the essential, grew more constant. Alexander seemed to conjure excuses to be near Clara. A new toy he chanced upon, a query about the girl's diet, a simple, "How is she doing?" that stretched into minutes of silent, almost hypnotic observation. Sophia's maternal instinct, ever vigilant, ignited like a lighthouse piercing the fog, transforming into an impenetrable protective shield. Every gesture from Alexander, however innocent it appeared, was interpreted by her as an imminent threat to the fragile world she had painstakingly built for Clara. Fear, once a distant whisper, now consumed her like a slow yet devastating inferno. She dreaded the truth about her identity, and especially about Clara's paternity finally surfacing. The life she had painstakingly erected with so much effort and sacrifice, brick by painstaking brick, threatened to crumble before her very eyes. Memories of her youth, of the overwhelming love shared with Alexander, of the abrupt and agonizing departure, resurfaced with an intensity that left her breathless. She knew she harbored a secret too monumental to be kept forever, but the sheer terror of its revelation paralyzed her to her core. Sophia began to shield Clara from any intrusion, keeping the little girl further away from Alexander. Small, subtle barriers, almost imperceptible to a less attentive observer, arose between them like invisible walls. If Alexander approached Clara in the great room, Sophia would invent an excuse to whisk her away to the bedroom. If he attempted to play with the girl in the garden, Sophia would declare it was nap time or snack time. She grew more cautious, more reserved, deftly sidestepping any conversation that might lead to unwelcome questions about her past, about Clara's absent father, about anything that could tear away the veil of mystery that shrouded her. The tension between the two swelled daily, palpable in the air, though no direct confrontation occurred, only exchanged glances and silences heavy with unspoken meaning. One afternoon, as Sophia tidied the great room, Alexander summoned her to his office. Her heart galloped, hammering fiercely against her ribs like a frantic drumbeat. He sat at his colossal desk, his face grim, eyes fixed on something clutched in his hands. As she drew nearer, Sophia realized it was an ancient photograph, its colors muted by the relentless march of time. In it, a youthful Alexander smiled, embracing a girl with dark hair and luminous eyes. It was her, a younger, more carefree version of Sophia Clark. "Sophia," he began, his voice low yet resolute, "we need to talk. About the past. About us. And about Clara." His words struck Sophia like a bolt of lightning. The air seemed to thin in her lungs, stealing her breath. This was the moment she had so profoundly dreaded, the chasm that now seemed to yawn beneath her very feet. Her legs threatened to buckle, yet she forced herself to stand, her protective instinct for Clara burning hotter than any personal fear. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Sterling," she attempted, her voice choked, a fragile thread of a lie she knew could not hold. Alexander placed the photograph on the desk, and beside it, a magnifying glass. "Do you remember this, Sophia? That weekend trip to the coast before you vanished?" He pointed to the photo, then to a minuscule detail on young Sophia's wrist, a small star-shaped birthmark. "I never forgot it, and I saw the same mark on Clara's wrist." Sophia's world reeled. Denial was futile. He knew. He possessed the irrefutable evidence. Tears sprang to her eyes, hot and uncontrollable, cascading down her face. The meticulously constructed castle of secrets she had built with such dedication shattered into irreparable fragments. "Why, Sophia? Why did you leave? Why did you never seek me out? Why did you conceal our daughter from me for 2 agonizing years?" Alexander's voice was laced with pain, with raw hurt, but also with a newfound hope that made him tremble. Sophia collapsed into a chair, her hands burying her face in despair. I was afraid, Alexander, afraid of not being good enough for you, for your world. I was merely a poor girl, and you, a young heir. Your family would never have accepted me. I overheard conversations, saw judgmental glances, and then I discovered I was pregnant. I believed I would be a burden, that I would utterly derail your life, your ambitious plans. I never wanted to be a problem. I thought it would be better to simply vanish, to build my own life far from everything. She lifted her gaze, her eyes red and swollen, brimming with an ancient ache. I knew it would be difficult, but I would do anything for Clara. She is my entire world. I protected her with my very life, with every fiber of my being. When I secured this job, I never for a moment imagined it would be your house. It was a staggering shock, but I desperately needed the work, and I forced myself to maintain my distance, to become utterly invisible. Alexander rose, rounded the massive desk and knelt before her, gently taking her cold hands in his. Invisible? Sophia, you were never invisible to me. I searched for you for years. I hired relentless detectives, scoured every hidden corner, but never found a single trace. You simply vanished into thin air, and now you are here, right under my very nose all these years, and with our daughter. The final words escaped as a whisper, laden with a profound, aching emotion. Our daughter, Sophia repeated, the truth sounding sweet and bitter all at once. It was the first time she had ever heard anyone utter those words. Yes, our daughter, Sophia. Clara is my daughter, mine, and yours. Alexander pulled her into a fierce embrace, an embrace that mingled years of profound longing, bitter pain, deep regret, and an overwhelming, surging joy. Sophia allowed herself to weep in his arms, a deluge of tears that was a cry of profound relief, of utter liberation, of all the tumultuous emotions she had suppressed for so long. In that embrace, the past and present spectacularly collided. Their accumulated sorrows and fears were washed away by the cleansing tears. Alexander gently pulled her back a little, cradling her face between his hands. I don't care what my family thought or didn't think. I always loved you, Sophia. And now I have you and Clara. That is all that truly matters. Sophia looked into his eyes, seeing there the same searing passion, the same profound tenderness that had captivated her years ago. The seed of their love, which had seemed utterly dead, now sprouted anew, stronger and more resilient than ever before. I am so terribly sorry, Alexander, she whispered, her voice still choked with emotion. Don't be, Sophia. The crucial thing is that we've found each other, that Clara has a father, and I have the family I always dreamed of, even without knowing I was searching for it right here all along. That night, Alexander and Sophia had the longest, most candid conversation of their entire lives. They relived the past, painstakingly clarified every misunderstanding, forgave old hurts and began to meticulously plan their future. Alexander refused to lose another precious second. He yearned to be the father Clara deserved, and the devoted partner Sophia always had by her side. Days later, Sterling Manor gained an entirely new vibrancy. Clara, once shielded by invisible barriers, now ran freely through the opulent rooms, her laughter echoing as she called Daddy to Alexander, who pampered her without bounds. Sophia, once the reserved cleaner, was now the esteemed lady of the house, Alexander's beloved wife and Clara's proud mother. She finally felt utterly complete, profoundly secure, and gloriously free from the crushing weight of her secret. Fate, or perhaps love itself, had bestowed upon them a second chance, uniting them through a tiny birthmark and an unbreakable bond. The story of Alexander, Sophia, and Clara stands as a powerful, poignant reminder that true love can indeed withstand the relentless march of time, the vastness of distance, and even the most deeply buried secrets. Sometimes, what we most desperately seek is right before our very eyes, merely waiting for us to summon the courage to truly see. It is irrefutable proof that life can always surprise us with a new beginning, even when we believe all hope is unequivocally lost. And you, what did you think of this dramatic twist of fate? Leave your comment, like the video so more stories like this reach you, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our emotionally charged narratives.